Okay, so tonight, Be'ezras Hashem, we're going to be continuing the series of Shirim, Entering the Sea of Wisdom, based on the weekly teachings sent out from the Tzadik and the Gaon, Rav Yitzchak Maya Morgenstern Shlita from Yerushalayim. And what we're going to be discussing tonight, and it was hard to choose a teaching because this week was so jam-packed with different elements that deserved attention and more focus. But Be'ezras Hashem Od Chazon L'Moed, and as a close student of the Rebbe once told me when I asked about the possibility of certain shirim that were referenced being published, certain shirim on the Groz Parish on Safeditz Niusa, this Talmud's response was, Be'ezras Hashem La'asir HaKol Yitgaleh. Be'ezras Hashem, in the future everything will be revealed. So Be'ezras Hashem, there's such an infinite amount of teachings that the Rebbe has brought into the world that deserve our attention. But I try and just go with my gut feeling and whatever is moshech me at the moment. So I choose that teaching. The Rebbe is actually, this was, I believe, recorded teachings that were from a past date, but they were brought down in this week. And it was with regards to a student of the Rebbe who was leaving Eretz Yisrael to come to Chutz La'aretz for his chasana. And the Rebbe was talking about what it's like to take leave from one's Rebbe, what it's like to take leave from a Tzadik. And the Rebbe enters into a whole conversation about the possibility of leaving a Tzadik, or what it actually means when a person is leaving. And so the conversation starts about what a person is to do if they live in a place without a Tzadik, if they live in a space where there's no direct spiritual source, where there's no individual sitting there and teaching these teachings. So what's one to do? So first, the Rebbe starts talking about friendship. Now, this was the Nakuda that we were going to discuss in the previous week, that the Iker Nakuda of Bechira, that an individual has, according to the Baal HaSulam, is the friends that they choose to engage with. And what the Beis Yisrael of Gur used to say, that when Chazal tell us, Haba l'taher mesaynoso, that when one has an earnest desire and an awakening within themselves to come closer towards Kedusha, when Chazal tell us that Shamayim helps them, it means that they send along a good friend. That this notion of friendship is of such an essential order when it comes to Avodas Hashem, quoting from the Rambam, who in his Perush on Mishnayos describes three forms of friendship, and the apex of friendship represented by something referred to as a chaver l'davar na'ale, a friend for a lofty purpose, for the service of cultivating an attachment to God. So in the absence of a Rebbe, the Rebbe brings down that a person should make sure to gather with three friends in Avodas Hashem who are mekusher to that tzaddik, mekusher to that derech of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, or whichever derech it is, through the lens of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. And that by sitting with those friends and discussing the tzaddik and discussing the source of the teachings, a person can create for themselves a certain space above space. Like we spoke about, Hine makom iti, that a person can enter into a makom that is lamalam and a makom, so that it is almost as if that I am not far from the place that I want to connect to. But what happens, says the Rebbe, if a person doesn't have those three friends? What happens if a person is unable to find that makom of hashra'ah, that place of connection, of his chabris, of connectivity? So the Rebbe brings down an eitzah from the Imrei Emes. And the Imrei Emes says at that point, the person can be makasher to the tzaddikim of Doros HaKoidmim, the previous generations of tzaddikim. And how does one do that? By learning a daf of Gemara. And when a person opens up a daf of Gemara, what they're doing is they're being makabel eitzah from Rava and Abaye, or any of the Tanaim, as Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, Zchus Yagan Aleinu, used to teach, that to say the names of the Tanaim themselves is of a spiritual value. So all the more so to encounter those tzaddikim, and when a person is learning the words of the Tanoim and the Amoraim, to recognize that I'm also being mekusher to the neshamos of those tzaddikim who revealed those words, which is b'derech klal, one of the kavanos, one of the intentions of Torah Lishma, that by learning the words of the Tanoim and the Amoraim, I am connecting my neshama to the neshama of those tzaddikim through whom these teachings have been drawn down into the world. And the Rebbe continues, and he says that there's even a stronger level, that a person has to understand that if you want to be mekusher to something in Kedusha, if you want to be mekusher to a Rebbe, or you want to be mekusher to the neshama of a tzaddik, as the Svarim HaKadoshim speak about, all one needs to do is arise within their thoughts a hiskashrus, a form of interconnection, And as we know from the Baal Shem Tov, a person is where their thoughts are. And if I envision within my mind being mekushar, connecting myself, binding myself to a friend, to a loved one, to a rebbe, to a teacher, to a place, it's not simply that my thoughts are focused on that place, but rather my thoughts transport me. For I exist within my thoughts, and wherever my thoughts are focused is on a certain level where I am. And with the proper emuna and the belief in the hiskashrus between a friend or a rebbe and a talmud, I can get to a place where by thinking about that other person, I can trust that that other person is somehow, some way, subconsciously, unconsciously, in whatever which way it means something, is also thinking about me. This is the yesod of what the Reishis Chachma describes in Shar HaAhava. One of, in my humble opinions, one of the most beautiful and potent pieces of Torah ever written. The Reishis Chachma in Shar HaAhava, where the Reishis Chachma spends so much time describing the Nakuda of Kamayim Hapanim El Hapanim, that just like the face is reflected in the water, so too is the heart of one individual reflected by the other, where he describes that the interrelationship between one person and the other, and all the more so between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not a two-step process where I think about Hashem and therefore Hashem responds and sends back oros to me, but rather the very aspect of me thinking about Hashem is in and of itself that interconnection with Hashem. That at the moment that I am contemplating my friend is aware on some spooky action at a distance type of way that they are being thought about, and that love is returned right back. So there's a way of being makasher to a tzaddik, being makasher to a rebbe, being makasher to an idea or a neshama, simply by contemplating those matters and shutting our eyes off from the intellectualization of what it means to be in contact and allowing ourselves to live in that moment of his kashrus. But the Rebbe says, and this is the nakud that I want to speak about most importantly, that even if that's not the place that a person is at, let's say a person needs more connection than just the connection of the mind. Let's say it's not enough to live with that almost as if connectivity that is removed from any real physical connection or emotional connection or speech. So what can a person do in order to be makusher to their tzaddik, in order to be makusher to the neshama that they want to be makusher to? So the way the Rebbe tells us, as the tzaddikim tell us, is by studying their books. That there's a certain inyan, that there's two ways of looking at an author and their book. We can look at an author, a mechaber, who writes a book, places their ideas onto paper, and once those ideas are recorded in paper and sold and published and sent out, so when a person reads the words of that teacher on paper, yes, they're studying the ideas of a person, but they're not relating to the person themselves, because once written, the book is a final product and it's removed from the mind of the mechaber. But there's another mahalach in Kedusha, that the mechaber themselves, mechaber comes from the lashon of chaver, which is friend, and chibor, which is interconnection, that the mechaber, they place their thoughts, they place their neshama, and they place their expression within the text that they're writing, to the extent that even when that book is disconnected from the thought or the hand of that author, the neshama of the author, the presence of that author, is buried within the text, so that when I study a sefer, when I study the book, it's not simply a studying or an understanding of information, but rather it's an encounter with the neshama, living or dead, who brought those ideas into the world. So that instead of reading dead texts, the books that surround us are meeting points. They're an ohel moed, where we encounter his kashrus or his yachdus, a connectivity with the tzaddikim who brought those lights down into the world. Now, the place that we learn this from, says the Rebbe, has nothing to do with tzaddikim and everything to do with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because when the Chazal were looking at the first dibra, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, so Chazal interpret Anochi to be the Roshei Tevos of Ana Nafshi Ksav Yahavis. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us, I have placed myself within the text and I have given myself over through the text, teaching us that it's a Torah's Chaim. It's not a dead book, disconnected from a dead author. It's a living text that is still in some miraculous way makusher to the mind of the Mechaber, so that when I read those words, it's almost as if the neshama of the Mechaber is standing in front of me. As Chazal and the Yerushalmi tell us, that when one is learning words of a tzaddik, when one is learning words of a teacher, they need to see to it as if that tzaddik, that Mechaber, is standing in front of them. Or elsewhere, there's another teaching that when words of a tzaddik who has passed away are studied in this world, the lips of that tzaddik are quivering in the kever, almost to show that the tzaddik lives on in the book. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu buried himself within the Torah HaKadosha. Moshe Rabbeinu is buried in the Torah. Chazal understood this. Chazal understood that when we get to the center of the Torah, when we get to the innermost point of that Torah, we encounter the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu. We encounter the light of the author, the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Rebbe says that if you can't be makasher to a tzaddik, and you don't have a tzaddik near you, and you can't find those three friends, and you don't have the ability to find other ways of connectivity, when you open up a book, when you open up the book of a tzaddik emes, you're makasher to that tzaddik, and it's almost as if you have the ability to talk to that tzaddik. I've heard it from Hasidim of the Rebbe, and I've heard it from Hasidim of other tzaddikim in the past, that if you can't bring a kvittel to your tzaddik, there's a minhag that some people will write a kvittel out and they will put it in a sefer of that tzaddik. Now, how it works, if it works, what is working, that's certainly beyond my pay grade. But the gesture itself, the act of placing your desire within the book of somebody, is one of the most significant gestures, I believe, that Yahadus has to offer, because we are a people of the book. We believe that information conveyed through a text is as significant, or almost as significant, as that face-to-face encounter. So the Rebbe says as follows. He says, "Haderech haragila behiskashus l'tzadikim b'limud Toraso," the general way of connecting to tzadikim through the study of their Torah. Ve'echad mehadrachim ha'ikarim shayu chasidim miskashim b'hem l'rabosayim. And one of the essential ways in which the Hasidim would connect themselves to their rabbis, haya al yedei limud Torahs rabbeisayim. It was through the study of their teacher's Torah. Shebetoras harav mislabeshes nishmas harav. For in the teachings and the Torah of that tzaddik is engarbed the soul of that tzaddik. In the bechina of Ana nafshi ksavis yahavis, that I, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, have given myself over through the vehicle of text, so that when you study the text, you are in fact being makusher yourself to the author themselves. V'im kain, af she'efshar lahamshich ha'ares nishmas harav, af be'etzem hamachshava v'izkasher selav be'ahava k'nizkol ha'el. And even though a person can cultivate a sense of relationship by way of a distance with a friend or a teacher or an idea by simply thinking about it, mikol makom b'derech haragil, the general way, hayu mishtamshim l'tzorech hizkashrus b'derech halimud b'teiras harav, that by studying the teachings of a tzaddik, you are makusher to the tzaddik. The Mittler Rebbe of Lubavitch says beferish in his Sefer Kuntres HaShtachavos, teaching us about what it means to be makusher to the neshamos of tzaddikim after their misa by the kvura. And he says beferish that if you want to be nechshav as a student of a certain tzaddik, all you need to do is find yourself in their works. That's enough of a hiskashrus to call yourself a Talmud. So studying the works, does that mean that just by knowing the ideas you're a Talmud? It could be, but what it really means, b'pnimius, based on what the Rebbe is saying, could be that because when you study their words, you actually have a hiskashrus to the neshama of that tzaddik. So we can be Talmidim of tzaddikim from Friedrich Doiros. We can be Talmidim of tzaddikim in this generation, even though we don't have that panim lepanim. Because when we believe enough in the Torah of the tzaddik, we have the ability to be makusher to the tzaddik through the writings themselves. Why is this? And here the Rebbe is going to say something particularly remarkable that demands a lot of unpacking, which we won't have enough time to do. Shet tzadikim doimim lebayrim. Our interrelationship with the tzaddikim throughout the generations is simply meant to be a way of understanding our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That just as we can't have a full grasp of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvayda uva'atzmo, and we can only be mekusher to him through his Torah or through the way that he reveals himself in the world, so too in our own experiences when it comes to our rabbeim or our tzaddikim, the tzaddikim are doimek tzat to the tzaddiko shel olam, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And just as we can't fathom the depths of the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the same laws apply with regards to our Rebbeim, the same regard to understanding the das of our Rebbeim and the das of tzaddikim. That in order to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to connect through the Torah itself, and by studying the Torah, we connect to the etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu somehow. That limud HaTorah is the essential way of being makosher to Hashem. So too, when it comes to the tzaddikim, that by studying their Torah, we're makosher to them. We are makosher to the tzaddikim who we want to be makosher to. That just as the tzaddikim are doima to their creator, v'haderach ha'esan hashav l'chol nefesh l'skasher l'asem yisbaruch hu al-yidei limud HaTorah HaKadosh b'kavanu b'ratzon l'stavik al-yidei HaTorah HaKadosh b'or ha'eliki ashreichem b'tzach oisias HaTorah. Just as HaKadosh Baruch Hu has offered us a gift, has offered us this gift that says, even though you can't connect to me, you can still connect to me through my garments, like the Balatanya says, that by learning Torah, you're makusher to the garments of the king, and you're only makusher to the garments of the king. The garments themselves are part of the king. So by connecting to the Torah, we connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The same is true with regards to tzaddikim. And so too with regards to the commandment to connect to our tzaddikim, which is an anaf, which is a branch of the mitzvah and dveikas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the Rishonim point out. Shahaderech hakvusha va'isana lidavik latzadik hu belimud Torah so bekavana hu bezkashrus l'nishmas hatzadik. That the way to study the writings of a tzaddik is with the intention of connecting to the tzaddik who brought these ideas down into the world. Shepanav, the face, as Rabbi Nachman says, the sichlo, and the mindset, the intellectual ore that tzaddik brought down, the chachmaso, and his wisdom, atufa b'toich diburav, is folded into, concealed within the words themselves. K'di'isa me'Rabbeinu HaKadosh b'Likutei Moharan. So what we see is that very often in a person's life, the idea of being makusher to the thing itself, to be makusher to the tzaddik, or to be makusher to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or to be makusher to the idea itself, is beyond us. For whatever reason, it might be because we're too broken at the moment. It might be because that idea is too far beyond us. It might be, like the Rebbe wrote also, that we don't feel ra'ui to call ourselves students of these tzaddikim. Who are we to come and claim that we're talmidim of this tzaddik or that tzaddik? I remember my Rebbe Rav Weinberger, I believe it was maybe the first time he was in Uman, I don't remember. There was a video of it. And he said that over here, everybody sings and screams, Ashreinu shezachinu lehizkariv l'Rabbeinu. Praiseworthy are we who have merited to come close to Rabbeinu, to Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, Tzlusi Yagan Aleinu. And he said, I don't have such a chutzpah to say, shezachini lehizkariv l'Rabbeinu. That there's times where a person can't even contemplate the idea of being considered a student of that tzaddik. But by studying the works, by connecting ourselves to the light in those svarim, we're makusher. So that no matter how far a person is, they could be at the end of the earth, they could be at the end of the world. And by studying the holy books, by taking refuge in these books themselves that are written b'kedusha b'tahara, there is a yichud that's taking place. There is a hiskashrus to tell us that studying Torah is not simply a way to learn to access the light. Studying Torah is the light itself. When a person enters into a book and divests themselves of self-interest and invest themselves with a desire to connect to that which is essential in the world, at that moment when you're studying the Torah lishma, which is what both the Gra and the Baal Shem Tov wanted as the essential nature of connection, a person is mukusher b'tachlis to the thing they want to be mukusher to. It's true with regards to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's true with regards to the tzaddikim, that we can find the light of the tzaddikim in the books themselves. And it's an eitzah. I could only speak for myself, but being so far at the end of the earth, trying to connect to tzaddikim, trying to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sometimes it feels so far, but then when you open up a sefer, when you open yourself up to that sipur within that book, to the brilliant light, that sapir out of the svarim, a person is mechaber themselves to the chaver and the mechaber. That's the connection that takes place. And we have to believe in that connection. We have to believe that the sefer is enough sometimes, until we're zochet to be panim el panim, until we're zochet to connect in the way that we desire to connect. And be'ezras Hashem, we should be zochet to believe in studying the svarim of the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, and studying the Talmidim of the Gra, and studying Chumash and being makosher to every nakuda of the tzaddik that is ganas in the Sefer itself. Be'ezras Hashem.